Well, hello there, and welcome back to Boardroom Insights. Alan O'Neill here with you with a KISS episode. This is an episode where it's just me on my own, and I'm going to talk you through strategy today and my thoughts on how you can better shape a strategy for your business. I want you to imagine you're out for a lazy Sunday afternoon walk, and you are walking through the Dublin Mountains, and the weather's lovely, and you come to this point where you've got choices. And the choices are, do you go to the left, where it looks leafy and attractive and interesting, or you can turn right, which looks equally interesting, leafy and attractive. But of course, what you don't know is where they both end up. You don't have a map, you don't have a compass, particularly, you don't have anybody to tell you. There's no signposts to tell you which way to go. So you make a call. You make a call based on gut instinct, or you make a call based on some indication that appeals to you. Well, strategy doesn't have to be like that. Strategy is one of those interesting phenomenons in business where you do have structure. You can do things to foretell the outcomes to help you make better quality decisions. So today, what I want to do is focus on the detail behind how you can make better quality decisions for your business. Now, as usual, this plays a part in my 7 steps to profit. Particularly in step number 3, which is all about shaping your strategy. Because once you have your North Star crafted and defined, that's your vision, your mission, and your purpose, that moves on then to culture. And remember I said before, vision, mission, and purpose are all part of North Star. They and your culture are locked in. They don't change because they're like the foundations for your business. However, strategy, on the other hand, you've heard the expression, culture eats strategy for breakfast, which I completely subscribe to. Strategy can and probably does change more often. Why? Because the world outside is changing at a frenetic pace. Now, there was a time when organizations put a lot of effort into building their 3, 4, 5-year plans, and I completely subscribe to that. That's still a good idea. However, because of the pace of change in our world, I don't believe that organizations can just do that anymore. What they can do is develop a rolling 3 to 5-year plan. What do I mean by that? I mean let's say on day 1, you and your team build a strategy for the next 3, 4, 5 years. However, if you don't check in on that in a year's time, you're going to miss something, because in a full cycle of your industry, 12 months is going to give you every cycle typical in your industry. If you don't check in on your strategy and have a look at what has moved, what has changed, well, then you could well be in trouble. We've had recent cases in point. For example, COVID. Now, I know that was an exception, and that doesn't only happen. I know that's an exception, and it doesn't happen too often, thankfully. But at the same time, that was a significant interruption to any long-term strategy, as indeed was AI. I mean, ChatGPT came upon the scene and other AI platforms quite quickly. And if we had waited till the end of your 3 or 5-year plan to start thinking about AI and how to incorporate it, you would have missed lots of opportunities along the way. So, in summary, you need to do your strategy every single year. Maybe not a complete redo, but certainly a check-in. Now, what is strategy? Well, strategy is a set of medium to long-term goals that determine the actions that are required to achieve those goals. And of course, the resources required, in other words, people, money, and things, the resources required to mobilize on that strategy. So here the point, it's medium to long-term goals, whereas operational initiatives or tactical things have a much shorter time frame. Strategy is all about medium to long term. Now, what does medium to long term look like? It varies from industry to industry, but you just heard me giving you the example of how 3 to 5-year plans are still happening and still worth doing, but they need to be updated regularly. Furthermore, a strategy describes the detail of not only the strategic pillars that you need to consider for your business, but also the initiatives required to deliver on those and the accountabilities. What do I mean by accountabilities? Accountabilities are all about who is going to do what, by when, and to what metric. And that sums up strategy, a set of medium to long-term goals and the resources required to achieve those goals. And then the next bit of detail is around the metrics and the accountabilities. Why I'm going to say again, because the world is changing at such a frenetic pace, we need to keep refreshing our strategy. So look, let me introduce you to the K-STRAT framework. That's the Cara strategy framework. And the playbook, when we're working with organizations and we approach strategy very differently to perhaps a big four or a big six. I know I've seen many, many times clients of ours where they might have used a big six consulting house before. And they come in and they interrogate the numbers. They spend weeks in your business interviewing lots of people. They pull this amazing binder together and they hand it over. Now, I say this with no hint of cynicism particularly, but honestly, very often those binders just remain on a shelf because oftentimes they're missing the concise summary, the detail, and the ability of people to execute on that strategy. The approach we take as a boutique consultancy is quite different. We facilitate the strategy development. In other words, we use our framework, which is a very practical K-STRAT framework, and that can be used for any business of any size. How do I know? Because I've done it over the last 30 years many times with businesses of varying sizes. I've used this exact same framework. It's pretty much a combination of all of the frameworks that you see out there, but it's my take on what is going on out there in the world at large with regard to strategy. This is my take on how we pull it all together so that you can win hearts and minds, which I'm going to come back to later on. So it's a very practical framework. And in summary, when we're doing a strategy session with a client, we treat it as a mini change program. And mini change programs you may have seen in my book, Show Me the Lid on the Box, How to Overcome Resistance to Change. That is a book on change management. And in that book, I describe the 4 Ds of change, which are discover, design, deliver, and develop. Well, when we're delivering a strategy intervention for a client, we use the same framework. We take time to discover, first of all, what is the client trying to achieve? And therein, we would often do an organization health assessment for them. So before we actually help them build a strategy, we will conduct this survey, which is quite a comprehensive survey that addresses all domains in my 7 steps to profit. It's a quantitative assessment that gives us data, and that's very rich data. We would often also meet with key players beforehand, key stakeholders before the strategy session to get a feel for the soul of the business. What's going on? How has strategy been done before? What worked? What didn't work? And how, crucially, is strategy making its way to the front line, if at all? When we do that combination of quantitative and qualitative discovery, we then sit back down again with the key stakeholders, as in the CEO, and perhaps 1 or 2 other people in that room, and we download what we came up with in our discovery, and then we design a strategy session. We co-design a strategy session with them. Phase 3 then is where we usually go away to a hotel for a few days and work with the senior executive team to work through a very, 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 very structured process to build out the strategy. Now, the key thing there is that we are winning hearts and minds. How? Because we're including the relevant people. Now, I know we can't include everybody because if you have more than 15, 20 people in the room, it can become very, very laborsome and it slows things down quite a lot. But how do you win hearts and minds throughout the organization? Well, I'll come back to that later, but you certainly need hearts and minds at the exec level. I came across a client recently and they were involved in interviews with an external big 6 consulting company. They had been asked questions and their answers were literally written down into the preliminary document. But when the strategy came out, the executives disowned it. They said, well, that's not our strategy. As time moved on then and the strategy was failing, it wasn't being executed effectively, the executives were easily able to blame the consultant. Said, well, it's not our strategy. That's the X-name consulting company. And that's what you miss and that's what you risk if you don't win the hearts and minds and involve them appropriately at the design and delivery stage. When I say deliver, I'm talking about delivering a program, an intervention where we go away for a few days and build the strategy. The building the strategy is the deliver part of my 4 Ds. And that leads us on to the fourth D then, which is develop for the long term. That's where we take the strategy that was built in the offsite and then we shape it up into documents and then put all sorts of disciplines in place to make sure it gets executed over time. So that's the 4D approach that we take when doing strategy with any client. In summary, when we do the 7+ index with a client, here's a sample of a report, specifically the element to do with strategy. The strategy category in the organization health assessment breaks into 3 subcategories. One subcategory is to do with how strategy is formulated currently in the business, and there are various questions within that section. Another section then is how budgeting is approached, because budgeting, just to be very clear, budgets are not plans. And far too many organizations put effort and energy into the budget process at the end of a year, and then they stop. They expect then that people know how to deliver on those budgets. Well, far too often that goes wrong. Go to the next level, which is now saying, well, how are we going to deliver on those budgets? Because if you leave things to chance or make assumptions based on previous events or previous strategies, you're in danger, serious danger of missing a trick, but also losing that opportunity to win hearts and minds and developing it out at the next level, which is the third category in this strategy section of the organization health assessment. And that's to do with functional strategy. What I'm saying here is that when an organization puts time into the master strategy, which is for the whole company, and that's where the exec team go away for a couple of days and then they build out the strategy using our framework. They come back then with a 1-page strategy, which I'll talk to you more about in a few moments. But what should happen then is that each executive now needs to go to the next level down and develop out their version of the strategy as a subset of the master plan. Now, the process, when we do then get to go away for a few days, having done the discovery, which is about getting under the hood and listening to where things need to be tweaked or oiled or whatever, that's the discovery phase done through the organization health assessment and some interviews. The design phase is where then I or one of the team will sit with the client to download what we got at discovery and then co-design the away day, the event that we're going to go away to the hotel for. Phase 3 is deliver. And at the deliver stage, that's where we're going offsite and we build out the plan. The model that we use for building out that plan is quite straightforward. It follows, in summary, 6 steps. It starts with, well, I guess in summary, it does external SWOT analysis, and I'll explain that in a moment, and then there's internal. But strategy should start from the outside in, where you're looking at what's going on in the macro environment. What are the opportunities and the threats that are going on out there that can have either a challenge or an opportunity for you? If you don't give due consideration to those, then you're going to miss some key points when you come inside to build out your strategy. So in summary, strategy is always outside in, not inside out. And in that outside in process, we're looking at things like the macro environment using 4 headings: S, T, E, and P. Sociological, that's everything to do with people, both customers and how they're changing, how they're thinking, perceptions, values, buying cycles. We're also looking at people, our own people. Working from home is a really good example, and the flexibility that's expected of people now to be able to work from home. So that's where you spend time to think about what's going on in the external marketplace, particularly on the sociological. That could be either an opportunity or a threat for us. Second is technological. What are the big technological changes that will have an impact? AI, like I mentioned earlier, is an obvious one, but there may be specific technological trends that are going on specifically in your sector that should be brought into the mix. And in there, you might find opportunities or threats. E is for economical. So what are the economical trends? It could be currencies, it could be tax, it could be growth, it could be recession, it could be inflation. factors that could be, again, present as opportunities or threats. And the fourth one is P. P is political. So you got geopolitical stuff going on, but you also have legislative stuff within your sector. And of course, in all of that, don't forget about the environment as part of that too. That turns your step into a STEEP, STEEP. Now, what that does is it gives you a focus on the external environment, what's happening in the external environment. And then in there, you'll identify opportunities and threats. And for now, all you got to do is red pen them. You don't have to do anything with them. Your wall around the hotel room is now covered in ideas, concepts, bullet points, and so on. Once you document them using the S, T, E, and P, you then red pen the ones that you believe are most critical to your particular business. Then you've got to go as a next level of outside consideration, look at the competitive environment. Who are your main competitors? What are they doing today that might present as an opportunity or as a threat for you? What particularly are your competitors doing? That brings you closer then to start looking at customers. How are customers changing? If they are changing, our customer expectations are increasing all the time. Are your customers' expectations changing? Are their buying cycles changing? Are their habits changing? All things for you to consider as part of the external macro environment scan. Now, you'll probably need a few cups of coffee after all of that, because now you're getting ready to move internally. And internally is where you start using the simple SWOT analysis. Remember, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We've pretty much done the opportunities and threats already because they're always external. The strengths and weaknesses now are for internal analysis. What are you strong on and what are you not so strong on within your own business? Here you need to use some standard pillars to help you with that checklist. In a workshop, we have all sorts of checklists. We have all sorts of mechanisms to really do a good study. What are the macro environmental things that might affect you? We have our own ideas. We have all sorts of checklists so you don't leave anything out. Now back inside to the internal SWOT analysis. We would encourage clients to identify what are the key pillars that you should be considering as part of your new strategy. And they're pretty straightforward. One pillar is always to do with people. And under the people heading, we would offer a checklist to go through all of the key things and considerations under people, from recruitment all the way through training, communications, and care and well-being, and so on. You can imagine. But people is one consideration. And when it comes to that section of the facilitated event, we look at what are we strong on, what are we not so strong on. And again, you're just making lists for now. What are the key strengths? What are the key weaknesses? Then we do exactly the same thing for product. That's the second pillar. The third pillar is place. Place is all around your route to market. The fourth category is usually around brand, which includes marketing, but other things too. A fifth category could be to do with operations. If you are a heavily operating type business like industrial factories or whatever, you may need to consider having a separate heading under operations. And the sixth or fifth, depending, pillar that you need to think about is internal controls. Internal controls is where you're now looking back in again, even further into the navel, at what are the things that need to be considered, like IT systems, like cost management, like your risk management, like your processes, reporting. These are all the things that you need to consider from an internal controls perspective. So let me summarize those strategic pillars again. You got people, product, place, brand, possibly operations, and internal controls. For each of those headings, throughout the facilitated event, we look at what are you strong on, what are you weak on today. And that's all it's doing, is just brainstorming, discussing, debating, and that's it for now. Then we go back over all of the stuff we looked at from the external marketplace. Remember all the things we red pen from the external macro scan? Well, now we bring those back in now and we add them to the relevant pillars wherever they are, wherever they fit best. We've got a comprehensive list, which is it's an amalgam of the external and the internal. Then we go through them again. Then we distill it down to the critical ones. We encourage brainstorming. And in the true spirit of brainstorming, you don't stop anything being discussed. You don't stop things that are somebody's soapbox. You add it to the list. But now you've got to be more disciplined and go back through the lists and bring them down to a smaller list. And from that, then we extract out what are the key initiatives that need to be done, that need to be effected, that need to be executed over the next year or so, that will close the gap between your ambitions and where you are right now. You will typically end up with 5 or 6 strategic pillars, and under each pillar, a set of initiatives that are well considered. Now, that all leads to what I call the one-page plan. The one-page plan is an executive summary. This effectively becomes the job description for the CEO for the next year, because you've got all the pillars identified, you've got the initiatives, and there'll be a number of initiatives for each pillar. And then you've got the accountabilities. Accountabilities, remember I said earlier, who does what, by when, and to what metric. And that gives you what we call the PIAs, pillars, initiatives, and accountabilities, all on one page. But it's really effective because it pulls everything together. And then, of course, throughout the couple of days that we are together, we debate, we argue, we discuss, we critique, and we end up then with everybody agreeing that these are the key initiatives and pillars that need to happen over the next year or more. Where do we go from there? Well, we then look at governance. Remember, I said earlier, one of the things that I've identified in my desk research is that gap. There's 2 major gaps I want to talk about. One is ensuring that strategy makes its way to the front line and then gets managed and governed effectively. The first thing that you need to do is, after the event, you need to identify for all the initiatives under each of the pillars, who is going to own what. So yes, we're looking for executive names here. So you want to build out what we call a RACI plan. RACI plan is where the A is for accountable. So the one person that's accountable for that initiative, their name has to go on it. The person who's going to do that particular initiative is the responsible person. Who should be consulted in advance before we execute that initiative? And who should be I for informed along the way and told about it? So now you have RACI. Responsible is the person doing the initiative. Accountable is the person who owns it. Only ever one person. The consult part is, who should we consult about this particular initiative beforehand? And informed is who should we inform along the way, or at least afterwards. And that gives you your RACI. Now that's really important, because you remember, we're trying to win over hearts and minds here. Not just the minds. Winning hearts and minds is where you get engagement. You don't get engagement just by presenting slide decks. You don't get engagement just by doing town halls. Yes, you will get some engagement, better than nothing. But when it comes to strategy at a local department level, you have to engage hearts and minds in a different way. And that's where you're building out the sub-strategies in each function. So the marketing guys will leave the major event, go back to their own team, work with their own team, present the high-level initiatives that were all agreed at the away day for the exec. Then they will strip out the marketing initiatives and now build out a next level down plan that fits in with part of that. And that's where you're closing the loop. The strategy is now coming from the top of the mountain, if you like, as tablets of stone, and now turning into real actions with real owners at local level. You may not be able to go away for 2 or 3 days like the exec did, but you should certainly be putting time into that planning piece, because you want to win over hearts and minds. Now, all of that needs to be checked throughout the year. I mean, at the very least, it should be monthly check-ins for the exec team, looking at the master plan, because once you build out these plans, they need to be documented. They need to be built into some sort of tracker documents. Now, don't worry, I'm not trying to create an industry here where you're just building things out for the sake of it, but you are developing something that is tangible and that is visible and people can see progress on. To what extent you share those with everybody is entirely up to you, because confidence levels and discretion levels can vary from organization to organization. You decide that. But you need to, at local level, make sure that you are monitoring. So regular check-ins on the strategy, where you bring in those strategy documents and you do your RAG rating, red, amber, green ratings on each initiative. When things go off track, maybe you can pull them back on track. At least by having monthly check-ins, you can then take corrective action on anything that might have slipped along the way. It's obvious, I know, but common sense is not always common practice. What I'm trying to do here is just to encourage you again, just to revisit the basics and take common sense and turn it into common practice. So look, that's it from me for now. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be delighted to answer in any way that I can. But in the meantime, I'd also like you to check out the new website called 7stepstoprofit.com. That's the number 7. And in there, you'll see detail about the 7+ index, which is a very powerful organizational health assessment that will work for any size business. And it'll give you the clarity and the insights into your business that you didn't know that you needed. So it gives you insights rather than hindsight. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on a future episode. Take care and have a great day.